Hello and welcome to pmzlounge.com. A very important topic today as we discuss the plan risk responses process. A very important process, so I'd like you to watch this video till the end. This is going to be very helpful, especially the examples that we have put together to explain the strategies that you would use to handle risks. Very important, so stick around. Also, if you are into reading articles, if you would rather read about this process than watch this video, then the first link in the description will take you to a relevant article on this topic over at our official website pmclounge.com. So first link in the description, check it out. Also second link in the description, as always, very important, the entire playlist of every single video on risk management knowledge area that is also available. So with that being said, let's get started. Okay, so by now you would have realized one thing, and that is that there is a lot of planning involved when it comes to the risk management knowledge area. If you have not realized it, here's another process for you, which is what we are discussing today. Plan risk responses. So this is the PGKA mapping. We are talking about the planning process group. We are in risk management knowledge area. We have already discussed all these processes. Like I said, second link in the description will take you to the playlist of every single video which covers all these processes. So let's talk about plan risk responses. This is process number 5 within the planning process group itself and the risk management knowledge area. All right, so the first sentence here, it is basically reminding you about the previous processes that we have covered in risk management knowledge area. That is, identify risks, perform qualitative risk analysis, perform quantitative risk analysis. So after you have done all that, after you have followed all those processes, you now would want to figure out what you would do if a risk actually materializes, right? So you've analyzed all the risk. Let's say the risk actually happens, the risk actually occurs. What are you going to do? And that's where plan risk responses process come into the picture. Now, here are a few examples. Is there some planning you can do early on in the project to avoid the risk? So right now you're in the planning stage, the work on the project has not started, and you see some kind of risk. Is there something that you can plan ahead of time so that the risk doesn't materialize? Can you keep some reserve funds to address the risk if it were to materialize? This is something where we talked about the EMV analysis in one of our previous videos. Second link in the description, list of all the videos. Check it out if you're still wondering what EMV is. So when you calculate EMV, can you put some funds in reserve so that if a risk materializes, you at least have the cost to cover that risk? Is there a way to transfer the risk? Maybe some kind of insurance, right? So is there a way where you can move the risk from your project to another project or to another team, to another vendor, buy an insurance, right? We'll talk about transfer as well later on in this video, but these are some examples of what you can do if a risk actually materializes. Let's move on. So we just talked about the three ways you can respond to a risk, and whichever way you go, there are more than three ways, of course, but the point here is you need to document your risk response in the risk register. So this is your risk register. You will have a number of risks noted in your risk register. For each of these risks, you will also document what your response is going to be if that risk materialized. Another important point to note here is, let's say this risk actually materialized and the response that you had planned was, if this risk materialized, you will add $200 to your project and will be able to mitigate the risk. So this is actually a change. You are adding $200 to your project. Now, you may have kept this $200 as a reserve, but you would require your change control board's approval to use those $200 in your project. If your change control board already had an idea that this was one of your planned risk responses, if the risk were to materialize, your change request will be approved fairly quickly because they were already aware of your risk responses. So it pays to make sure that your change control board agrees, and not just reviews but also agrees to the risk register where you have documented all your planned risk responses. At this point in the planned risk responses process, it is also important to introduce the topic of strategies for handling risks, strategies for handling both negative risks as well as positive risks. So let's look at them in the coming slides. A quick reminder before we move ahead, if you're looking for PMP book recommendations, head over to pmclounge.com/resources. This is where we have listed our favorite books, and hundreds of our subscribers has cleared the PMP exam with these resources. So check it out. All right, let's get back to the strategies for handling risks. And to begin with, we will be talking about negative risks first. So, can you avoid the risks, right? So, in other words, can you duck away? Can you prevent the risk from materializing? The example here is if there is a risk that the project won't be complete by the target end date, can you simply extend the timelines, right? So let's say you added 3 weeks to your project end date. Can you do that? If you do that, you are basically avoiding the risk of missing the project end date. The next strategy is mitigate, and this is where you create a plan B. So if the risk does materialize, what are you going to do? So you are going to execute your plan B. For example, in our previous example itself, there was the risk of missing the target end date. Let's say that risk was due to an extra functionality that is being requested by the customer. And to code this extra functionality in, you would require more time. And as a result, you are going to miss your project end date. So can you target this functionality for the next project? Can you start working on it right away, but instead of making it a part of this project, you move it to the next project? You're not avoiding it, by the way, here, right? Because you are actually working on this extra functionality. It's just that you're working on another project and not this one. That is how you're mitigating the risk. The next strategy is to transfer the negative risk. So think through, can someone else own your risk? That is what insurance does. So if you have life insurance, if you have medical insurance, by the way, if you don't, get them, because that is how you transfer your risks to a third party. So how about you involve a third party vendor to work on the extra functionality if they are able to meet the deadline? So let's say you employ someone to create or code that extra functionality so that you are basically transferring the risk from your team to the third party vendor. And finally, the fourth way to handle negative risk, the fourth strategy is to accept that there is a risk. This is where you know that there is a risk and you choose to accept it. So you just say you cannot do much about it and you are going to accept it. You already know that driving fast is dangerous, but if you still drive fast, don't do that, by the way, you are actually accepting the risk. Now, note that in certain texts, you will find passive acceptance of risk and active acceptance of risk and all that. But the bottom line here is when you accept the risk, it does not mean that you cannot even have a workaround. You can have a workaround when you're accepting the risk as well. That does make risk accepting this strategy, that does make this closer to risk mitigation, because that is where you have a plan B as well. But having a workaround pays off when it comes to real life projects. So don't shy away from having a workaround if you are accepting the risk. All right, strategies to handle positive risks, also known as opportunities. So there are four strategies that you can employ to handle positive risk. Number one is exploit. This is where you do everything that you can to make sure that the positive risk materializes, the opportunity happens. For example, if you can save money by procuring from a different city, but it might take some more time. How about placing the order earlier to stay on time as well as save procurement costs? So as simple as that, you make the order earlier so that the order arrives in time, and you also save money by procuring it from different cities. So this is how you're exploiting the opportunity. You're making sure that the opportunity happens, it materializes. The next in the list is share. So can you employ a third party vendor just like you did when you transferred the negative risk? Can you employ a third party vendor here who is going to help you increase your chances of materializing the opportunity? Let's take an example. In the procurement example that we discussed in the previous slide, can you pass on some of the saved cost to the customer and ask for more time to complete the procurement? So let's say you are not able to get that procurement on time, right? It does save cost, but you're not able to get it on time and you would need an extra 2 weeks. So of that saved cost, can you pass some of that saved cost to the customer, give them a discount or something, and ask them for 2 more weeks so that you can procure from a different city at a cheaper rate? So this is how you share opportunities. Next is enhance. Now, it is important to understand the concept of risk trigger here. This is an important concept before we can discuss enhance. So risk trigger, one line definition is a warning sign that a risk is coming. So risk triggers you will see for both positive risks as well as negative risks. So positive risks will also have triggers. So enhance is where you are trying to influence the triggers, influence the opportunity triggers or the risk triggers of the positive risks, and you're going to make the opportunity more probable. So let's say when you tell your vendor that you have several projects in the pipeline and they can become your preferred vendor, what you're doing here is, in addition to negotiating, you are actually enhancing the possibility of getting a better rate, getting a discount, right? So when you tell them that you have several projects and you are always going to come to them for procurement, you have a chance, you are enhancing the possibility of getting better rates. So this is how you handle opportunities. And finally, the last strategy to handle positive risks or opportunities is to accept them. So just like negative risks, a positive risk materializing is like an opportunity knocking the door. So you can simply accept it. For example, your vendor offers you a 10% loyalty discount, right? Nobody is going to say no to that. So you simply accept that opportunity and move on. Finally, for the question of this video, these strategies that we talked about for both positive as well as negative risks, these are actually the tools and techniques of the planned risk responses process. Meanwhile, inputs and outputs are something that you should already be aware of since we have discussed them as part of risk management knowledge area. So can you name a few inputs and outputs of this process? Remember, you were updating the risk register with your risk responses. So updates to risk register, can that be an output of this process? Let me know in the comments. Definitely waiting for your answers. So that is all that we had in this video. Smash that like button if you got value out of it. It helps us stay motivated. Also, don't forget to smash that bell icon as well to stay notified whenever we upload new content. Also, check out our website pmclounge.com, your number one free PMP resource. Thank you.